Hello. Welcome. What a great crowd. Thank you for being here. And thank you for the Chiefs for playing an evening game. That really helps us all, you know. I'm Jeremy Druin, and I head up the library's Missouri Valley Special Collections. And our research room is located across the hall from this auditorium, so feel free to pay us a visit following the program. And while there, I hope you take a moment to enjoy a collection of archival material that we have on display in celebration of the Folly's 125th anniversary. In 2011, the Folly donated to the library their extensive archive of entertainer records, photographs, theater posters, and building plans. This important collection documents the theater's evolution over the past 125 years, from a popular vaudeville and burlesque venue to the leaner years when it was a adult cinema house. And finally, its restoration and rebirth in 1981, which helped fuel Kansas City's historic preservation movement. It has remained a thriving entertainment venue and indelible downtown landmark. The restoration of the Folly Theater truly paved the way for downtown's revitalization and the preservation of numerous other historic structures, including the very building we are in today, which opened in 1906 as the First National Bank. It's been the library since 2004. We are thrilled to be able to help the Folly celebrate its 125th anniversary by hosting this program. Again, thank you all for taking the time out of your day on a Sunday to be here, to be a part of that celebration. At this time, I invite Folly Theater President and CEO Rick Truman to the podium to give remarks about their milestone anniversary, and then introduce our speaker, Kate Egan.
Good afternoon. It is such a pleasure to see everybody here today. So can I start off by asking, who has seen a show at the Folly Theater? Ooh, very nice. Very, very good. Who has seen a show at the Folly Theater prior to 1974? Who will admit they saw a show at the Folly Theater prior to 1974? Well, it is such a pleasure to have you all here, and we hope that you will come back to see a show very soon. We have a great show on Tuesday night celebrating our 125th birthday. It is the actual day, 125 years after the building opened in 1900. And so we thought, it's a Tuesday night, why not invite everybody down for a local Kansas City band that is a great party band? I love one of their taglines is they're at home at a juke joint on Saturday night or in church on Sunday morning. I thought, those are the people I want to party with. So that is Tuesday night at 7:30, and if you don't already have a ticket, they're only $25. So very, very accessible. If you want to be a Folly supporter, we also have a VIP ticket for $125. You are welcome to join us for that. $1 for every year we've been around. And we have a great jazz season coming up. I don't know if you know, we are the longest running jazz season in Kansas City. We are starting off with a fellow birthday celebration. Pete Escovedo is celebrating his 90th birthday with us in October. And then we have Lakeisha Benjamin after that, a tribute to Miles Davis. Joshua Benjamin is going to be with us. It's a really great season. We also like to say that no matter who you are or what your story is, you should find yourself represented at the Folly. So if jazz isn't your thing, we have dance, we have comedians, we have an Elvis tribute concert coming up this Friday night. We have a play called The Mask coming up the Saturday after that. There's always something going. So hopefully you will come join us for a show or more than one this season. Go to follytheater.org and you can get all the information about what's coming up. But what's coming up now is the reason we're all here, and that is to hear more about the Folly and her 125 years. When we were thinking about how we wanted to celebrate this milestone anniversary, I literally, the first person that came to my mind was Kate Egan. Kate is a friend of mine, and I knew that she was a font of information about the Folly. I did not know how much until we got to talking about doing this program, but I emailed her one day, because she lives in New York now, so I have to talk to her by email, and said, hey, would you be interested in being a part of the 125th birthday celebrations? And she wrote back and said, oh my God, I was just getting ready to email and say, hey, is there any way I can help out? So I am thrilled that she is here with us. Just to give you a little bit of background on her, and I have some notes because I wanted to make sure to not miss anything because she is a very impressive person. She actually started her career here in Kansas City in the late 90s. She worked for Contemporary Productions with concerts at Sandstone and Starlight. And then she went to the Folly Theater. She was director of theater operations at the Folly from 98 to 2004, which was a perfect marriage for her of her love of theater and live performance, but also historic preservation. She has a master's in historic preservation from Goucher College in Baltimore, Maryland. So it was a perfect spot for her. But then she left the Folly. She went on to a brief stint as a preservation city planner for Liberty, Missouri, and then returned to live theater with Theater League, where she worked for 5 years managing Broadway musicals and tours that came through. Then she left Theater League to go on tour with the actual shows that had been coming through. She worked for 5 years as a company manager with touring shows, and then she actually landed as a resident in New York City working on Broadway shows. I asked her for a list of some of her favorite shows, and she told me those were Evita with Ricky Martin, Rocky, The Audience with Helen Mirren. I mean, how can you go wrong with anything with Helen Mirren in it? School of Rock, and Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. And then for the last 6 years, she has been general managing and is responsible for global general management of the Broadway musical MJ, the Michael Jackson tribute, and she also is involved with their tours. They won 4 Tony Awards for that show. She's been involved with the Broadway show, the US tour, London, Hamburg, and Melbourne. And this past spring, she was general manager of the 7-time Tony-nominated Dead Outlaw. So, very impressive, a font of knowledge. I can't wait for her to share all her stories, so I will stop talking so she can. Please help me welcome Kate Egan.
Hi, everybody. Oh, mic is working. Very nice. Hello. Hi. It's lovely to see you. It's lovely to see so many friends. Thank you to my family who came from St. Louis. Thank you to so many friends that I haven't seen in forever and have shown up, and the Folly volunteers. It's great to see you. Want to say in advance, I had to cut a lot for time here. If you have a question about something, please ask at the end in the Q&A. If I don't answer your question here, we are going to take a tour over to the theater. Ask me at the theater. Let's see what we can get through. Great, let's begin. Starting at the beginning. So Colonel Ed Butler was a St. Louis political boss, nowhere near the scale of Tom Pendergast, but with his group, the Big Cinch, he ruled St. Louis Democratic politics for 25 years. Along with his son, and his son JJ is to the right, who was the president of the Empire Circuit of Vaudeville. He already owned the Standard Theater in St. Louis, which was at 7th and Walnut, built in 1883, and the Chicago Standard Theater that was built in 1887. So the Standard, Kansas City, Standard was its original name, was opened as an expansion of that. These two knew that touring to Kansas City was really challenging, and it's all geographical. So it was always too far east for the West Circuit, it was too far west for the Eastern Circuit. It's a 1,200-mile distance to your nearest base of supplies in New York. If you're headed west, it's an expensive 2-day train ticket from Denver. So a lot of shows skipped Kansas City just for geographical reasons, but they thought that they could create their own Venn diagram and put everything St. Louis, Kansas City, and Chicago together to make this work. So they bought the lot at the corner of 12th and Central in 1898. And that lot had 3 major advantages. First, easy access to the rail yards. Everything traveled by train. So your scenery, costume, actors, everything was coming in by train. The access to the streetcar for your audience to get in. But its number one advantage is that it newly had access to the brand new power grid. So they were able to design with electric lights. So gas lighting and limelight for theater had already been replaced by carbon arc lamps, but carbon arc lamps only lit the stage, and this was the first time that you would be able to light the auditorium and the front of house. So the theater today looks exactly as it did 1900 when it opened, including the lighted ball on the roof. To this day, as the architect intended, at half hour to curtain, that ball is raised and lit, and when the curtain comes down at the end of the night, it's turned off and brought down. If you think about our current light pollution and the skyscrapers, but if you take all of that away, at the time, you would be able to see for a very great distance that there was a show going on. So this was also advertising that there was a show happening at the Folly, the Standard. Colonel Butler engaged Kansas City's renowned architect, Louis Curtis, to begin designs of the Standard Theater in 1898. Those plans were actually found in the stage floor in the 70s. They're now on file at UMKC. Louis Curtis is considered one of Kansas City's most legendary architects, and about 30 of his buildings are still standing in Kansas City alone. Mineral Hall, the Boley Building, his studio building at 11th and McGee. But he was also one of its most unusual residents. He smoked only monogrammed Turkish cigarettes. He wore only white. At the time, he was one of about 8 people that had a car in Kansas City, and he was ticketed for overturning a carriage going 35 miles an hour on the streets. He was known for his fixation on Eastern philosophy and the occult. But he is also known internationally as having pioneered the glass curtain wall that is the basis of all modern skyscrapers. Previously, exterior walls were load-bearing. This let the interior structure be load-bearing, and the glass on the outside just protected from the elements and just had to hold its own weight. So the Boley Clothing Building at 11th and Walnut is one of the first glass curtain wall structures in the world, and he's father of the modern skyscraper. The exterior of the theater is true to Curtis's vision. You have buff brick coins up and down the sides, and your eyes drawn upward from the street to the columns and the Palladian window, which is a signature of this late Victorian design. It also called for the 3, you'll recognize this, you walk through them all the time, the 3 sets of 3 doors that are interrupted by buff brick to advertise the shows in between. Opening day, September 23rd, 1900. For a total price of $250,000, which is $9.6 million in our dollars. The Standard first opened September 23, 1900, with a presentation of a vaudeville and burlesque show called the Jolly Grass Widows. It had been a smash on the East Coast, and it arrived with 35 company members, 2 train cars of scenery and special effects. And Colonel Butler expected a huge response. He expected to fill the house, and he did, even though the next day, Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West show was recreating the charge up San Juan Hill just across the way. But he really wanted women to be comfortable coming to the theater. And so this Jolly Grass Widows performance, he had all of the blue humor taken out of it so that everyone would feel welcome, and consequently, it just wasn't that funny. So there were only 20 women in the audience anyway, and nobody was offended. But noting that the Standard was also built in concert with the hotel that was to the west. Stand by, sorry. As you can see, the architecture was complementary across those. And what was originally the hotel is now, of course, the expanded lobby and the dressing room wing today. But the exteriors matched across there. Unlike the south facade, the theater's interior was completely different. It had 2 balconies, and we don't have a lot to tell us what the original interior looked like other than the architectural plans and newspaper accounts that said the interior was alternating carmine, white, and green with artificial lighting highlighting each of the features, which would have been very fancy in that moment. We know that the plaster relief was on Grecian lines, and it was much deeper than the current relief. The drop curtain contained a replica of one of Sir Edward Burne-Jones' Cupid and Psyche series that was called The Disarmament of Cupid. The proscenium then was 10.5 feet higher than it is currently, and was designed at 32 feet so that those in the top of the second balcony could still see a trapeze act. The fresco that's on the proscenium is original to the building, and the original ceiling was also several feet higher If you look up when you're standing on Central and you see the windows at the top, that was the ventilation before HVAC was a thing. And it originally sat 2,400 people. It currently seats 1,005, and the four walls have not moved. So if you thought it was cramped in 1981, we assume that the second balcony had bench seating. This is all we have to know what the original interior looked like. This is above the current ceiling. If you crawl into the attic and walk across the ceiling toward the stage, we know it had angels. The photo on the left is one that existed as part of a slideshow from when I arrived. The one on the right is one I took in the 90s. It's what we know of that original interior. So Colonel and JJ opened the theater, and it's not going very well. She's messy. Her construction's not done when it starts. An article from the opening day noted that the preview of the building the night before, attendees were at risk at any moment of having a pot of paint dumped on their heads. So there was still construction work that was going. And second, the programming was not nailing it. The Standard was open to accommodate vaudeville and burlesque performances, but burlesque at the turn of the century isn't what burlesque became. It just meant that there was a chorus line of dancing girls, and the humor was more blue than what you would expect for a family audience. You have to remember Queen Victoria is still on the throne when the building opens. This is very highbrow society, and women in polite society would not attend anything that had burlesque. The clip here is from the New York Dramatic Mirror. If you look on the lower right, the burlesque features at the Standard continue to draw small audiences. It wasn't going well. But fortunes in the theater, as we know, can change quickly. This is the Coates Opera House. It was at 10th and Broadway. This was Kansas City's premier opera house for the last 3 decades of the 19th century. And the Coates was known nationally. It brought top entertainers, the best stage actors of the day, to what was known as a cow town. And they caused a huge scandal in 1885 when they announced that they were asking women to remove their hats to come to the theater. Thank God somebody did it, but they had. So cue the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune for the Standard. January of 1901, the Coates was playing Hamlet and Heart and Sword, featuring known heartthrob Walker Whiteside. This was a heartthrob, ladies and gentlemen. Alternating nights. And January 31st, 15 minutes after the curtain came down on Heart and Sword, the Coates burned to the ground from a fire in the boiler room. If they had been playing Hamlet that night, the audience would have still been in the house. Before the flames were even doused, O.D. Woodward, whose Woodward Stock Company was performing at the Coates, called Colonel Butler and said, "Can I use your theater?" And so he said yes, and a month later, Romeo and Juliet opened on the Standard stage. The Woodward Stock Company slid into the schedules of the Standard and the Auditorium, which was the Warder Grand at 9th and Holmes for that spring. And after they played All the Comforts of Home in May, the Woodward's lease expires. That becomes important. Live entertainment is the only entertainment at this time, and stage space is at an absolute premium across the city. O.D. Woodward was seemingly the only local theater producer. Everyone else is a carpetbagger with traveling shows. He's scrappy and he keeps popping up. He actually pops up all the way into the 20s. But he's at times a little shady. So were a lot of people in the story, it's fine. So the Standard was dark for the summer. It didn't have air conditioning until 1911. So as you can imagine, nobody's sitting in those walls with 2,400 people that way. So it was a rocky first season, but it was also the dawn of a new age. Unlike when we rolled the odometer from 1999 to 2000, 1900 was considered the last year of the 19th century, and December 31st of 1900 into January 1 of 1901 was considered the first year of the 20th century. And that was also the night of Kansas City's Century Ball. The ball was such a phenomenon that it even made the London papers, and Kansas City became known as the Century City. So starting the 1901 season, Colonel Butler changed the name of the theater and the hotel to the Century. So to open the newly named Century, Colonel Butler leased the theater to the Andrews Opera Company. They promised to perform operas in English and keep the prices affordable. And they opened the season with Carmen to good houses. And the reviews were positive for everything that they did, but by October, the trade papers were already noting that they were in financial trouble due to mismanagement. And somewhere in there, they became the Andrews Butler Opera Company. Seemingly, they got bailed out along the way. And here comes O.D. Woodward and his partner Burgess. 2 months followed of wrestling for control of the Century. O.D. is building the Willis Wood at 11th in Baltimore, but word was that the construction was not going to be done by January 15th when he needed it. So he had shows booked into a space that did not yet exist. Suddenly, that very month, a woman named Mrs. Reese emerged from the shadows to say that she had a lease on the Century. And she gave her a power of attorney to who? O.D. Woodward, who swore he really didn't have any need for the Century. He was just trying to help out a kind lady who was in a spot and didn't know anything about the theater business. So the butler said that she didn't have a lease, which she said was a piece of paper that was signed by the hotel manager that didn't mean anything, but it turned into a fight. J.J. Butler ends up in town as the manager. They duked it out for 6 weeks. The opera company's doing great performances, but it's not doing fine financially. And by November 30, the Andrews Opera Company is out. Woodward and Burgess have a 5-year lease to manage the Century. So all the shows that were scheduled for the Willis Wood end up at the auditorium, and the Woodward Stock Company is back in the Century until the Willis Wood finally opens in August of 1902. Let's take a moment here for Jeannie Eagles. A hometown Kansas City girl, actress Jeannie Eagles made her debut on the Century stage as Little Eva in Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1902. By the time she was 17, she'd made it big on Broadway, and in 1922, she was cast in her favorite role as Sadie Thompson in the South Seas drama Rain. The play takes place during a typhoon, but every time she left the stage, they would douse her with a bucket of water so that it looked like she was coming in from the rain. But unfortunately for her already fragile mental state, it was further damaged by being forced to wear wet clothes 9 shows a week for 2 years. So she was nominated for an Academy Award, the second ever Academy Award ceremony, for her 1929 work in The Letter, which was a movie, of course, but she didn't live long enough to find out whether or not she won. She died of an alcohol and drug overdose in her New York apartment, October 3 of 1929. But more than 3,000 people turned out for her Kansas City funeral. And she's buried in Calvary at 69th and Troost. In August, when the Woodward Stock Company departs, we go back to burlesque and the original intent of the theater. Can't imagine that the Butlers were terribly happy about all of this going on and how it was going. So in 1902, they install a good friend of theirs from St. Louis to be the new manager of the hotel and their proxy with the theater, and he will become legend. But let's talk first about the realities of these 2 buildings. This is a Sanborn fire insurance map. I love Sanborn maps. These are on the Library of Congress website, and they're the coolest thing ever. The Sanborn Fire Insurance Company mapped every city in America every 10 years, so you could see what was going on. But we can see from this, so we have the Century Theater. That's very obvious. What we know from this that is different. Off, as you look to the left from where the stage of the Century is, that is the dressing room wing. But we also learn that here, the saloon, turns out there was a door between the hotel and the theater, and the hotel bar served as the refreshment area for the theater. So they were very interconnected. They were very reliant on each other for plumbing, for structure, for several things, but we know that there was a door connecting the 2. The other thing that we know, not necessarily from this map, but is that the lower level of the Century Hotel, Edwards Hotel, it changed its names about 15 times, but the Edwards Cabaret that was on the lower level lives in legend. It was a night spot known for its celebrity clientele, including countless high-profile people who would gather after their evening performances. Tom Pendergast and Barney Alice both had standing reservations. And there was a stage in the center of the grill to accommodate the whims of the patrons. As performers finished their shows around town at night, they would go over there and continue the party going. The staff was also well known to be show people, including the waitress Edith Baker, who went on to star in the Ziegfeld Follies, and composer Ernie Burnett composed My Melancholy Baby on the girls' piano. And the man in charge of it all, the butler's friend from St. Louis, is Joe Donigan. I love Joe Donigan. Makes me so happy. Joe became known as the Angel of 12th Street and the Mayor of 12th Street. He was the king of nightlife in Kansas City for more than 20 years, and this was his kingdom. He was a sportsman, a showman, a gambler, a giver, and he had a giant heart. He championed show people in every form. He made and lost 3 or 4 fortunes. He was never big on keeping books, which was a problem. But every article written about him notes that he never said no to a single person who was down on their luck. And a lot of people knew that and made him their mark, and he didn't care, and he just kept taking care of everybody. But he managed the Edwards Cabaret, the hotel, and then after Woodward and Burgess, he managed the theater. He booked vaudeville and burlesque. He introduced the first smoke if you like policy that became standard for burlesque. He introduced wrestling matches to Kansas City, and there was a match every Saturday night to a packed house. He loved boxing, and most of all, he loved show people, and they loved him. He supported so many on their way up, and they never forgot him. So let's meet some friends. This is Fanny Brice, funny girl. Legendary comedian Fanny Brice was a good friend of Joe's and was known to be at the Grill every time she was in town. She also appeared on the Century stage during the vaudeville circuit of 1908 to 1909, and she most certainly stayed in the Edwards Hotel. Without printed programs, it's sometimes hard to know who was around, but we have several sources that say Will Rogers was also a regular performer at the Century and a fixture in the Grill. And this is Eva Tanguay. Eva was the queen of vaudeville. She was the highest paid and most outrageous vaudeville performer of the era, as popular in her day as Harry Houdini. She was a master of publicity and was the first to have press follow her daily moves. And she was known to perform at the Century, and Joe chastised a longtime tenant who complained about the service in the hotel by saying, if it was good enough for Eva Tanguay, I don't know what your problem is. In addition to show people were the boxers. When live fights weren't available, Joe would purchase filmed version of the fights for the audiences. It was a little bit of a problem because the projectionist apparently had a drinking problem. And these are crank projectors, so sometimes it was slow and sometimes they'd race around the ring. One of the most legendary boxers of the first half of the 20th century, Jack Dempsey, fought on the Century stage several times. And after his fights, both 1914 and 1915, he returned to the stage to play his violin in the vaudeville show. Legendary boxer Jack Johnson fought on the Century stage several times. However, unlike most performers, Johnson and his wife, Etta Duryea, were not allowed to stay in the hotel because Johnson was black. But there was an apartment inside the theater between the balconies that Joe promptly cleared to make sure that Johnson and Duryea could stay on site and they didn't have to go elsewhere despite the segregationist policies. Old Joe hired Frank James, brother of the more notorious Jesse, to be a ticket taker later in life when he needed a job, and he did only take tickets. Follies of Pleasure, many of you have seen a reprint of this poster. It is now on file here at the library. This is the last show poster we have of that era. And along with the collection that they were discussing, it's here. I got to see it yesterday. Again, it was nice. May 2nd, 1920, a fire was discovered in the second balcony during the matinee. And the audience reportedly there were about 600 people in the house at the time, including 100 that were in the gallery. The audience reportedly didn't know there was a problem until a manager came on stage and said, "There's a fire, get out." Everyone calmly filed out, and there was a roving group of Marines who were in town recruiting who helped get everyone to safety. By the time everyone was out, smoke was pouring out the upper windows. And they were able to get the fire out. But to go on with the evening show, they had to put sawdust on the floor to mop up the water. There was $25,000 worth of damage to the building, mostly from smoke and water. But they continued to give performances as the Century through 1922. But 12th Street in 1922 is getting dicey, and it's an even worse place and wilder place than usual. Prohibition's in full swing, and while Kansas City was the wettest town, I'm sorry, just realized I hit that, in the country, was the wettest town in the country through those years, and known to be the most wide open for every kind of vice. The Edwards Cabaret was busted by the feds for selling booze. And with that, Joe Donigan was let go from his job. He didn't go to jail, but both of the butlers had passed away by then, and the new owner fired him. He never fully recovered from being dismissed from his post as the mayor of 12th Street, and over the next 8 years, he tried a number of other businesses, none of which really worked out. He blamed the advent of movies and prohibition for the downfall of Kansas City's downtown, the vacant buildings, and the poverty unrest. He said, "You never see a man whistling on the street since prohibition." He died in 1930 at age just 54. And why have I spent so much time talking about Joe, other than he's my favorite, is that he's the Folly's most prominent ghost. We will talk about over at the theater if you want to know. In 1923, Lee and J.J. Schubert, theater producers in New York, took a lease on the Century with an agreement to do a full renovation and to present legitimate shows. They'd built the Sam S. Schubert in Kansas City at the corner of 10th and Baltimore in 1906, which was the legitimate theater in town. And this was the first of the Sam S. Schuberts, who was named after their brother, who died in 1905. They were named the theater Schubert Missouri Theater and decided to try having their own stock company. So they enlisted Herbert Krapp. Herbert Krapp is their house architect. He redid the interior, taking the 2 balconies to the 1 that we see today. Krapp was the house architect for more than 45 years, and he designed 13 Broadway theaters and redid 2 more. And this is from the Schubert archive. This was really fun this summer. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, this is his graph paper drawing of what he was dealing with when he was coming into the Standard to make the changes. These are the original 1923 tissues from the Schubert archive, which is Herbert's original vision for what this renovation would look like. As you can see, we're to a single concrete cantilevered balcony. It looks a great deal like where we landed, and very similar to many other theaters he designed. 3 boxes down each side. Looks familiar. The one thing that is drastically different is if you look at the 2 things that say the present ceiling line, that's never where they ended up. So he had visions of the ceiling ending up higher than it actually did, and the full piece across there that was just never realized. This is the full elevation. Reminder that there had been an apartment between the 2 balconies. His vision was to make a very grand manager's office in the liminal space behind the balcony. That did not actually happen, at least to our knowledge, unless somebody was renovating in the 70s and wants to tell me something different. I don't know. And he had plans for a grand box office as well. These are the blueprints. We unrolled them for the first time in 100 years, at least to our knowledge, this summer. It was really exciting. There was a lot of correspondence about what this was costing. Of course, construction creep is real, and there was a lot of talk about what can we reuse to keep the cost down. So there are a few elements remaining from the Standard/Century. They are the fresco above the proscenium. This is original to the building. When we were cleaning it in 2000, which you can see in the lower photo, we discovered that between the 2 snake-headed swans, it used to say ST for Standard Theater. Chandeliers, so much correspondence about how much the electrical fixtures were costing, and please, could you reuse? So the 3 chandeliers that run east to west are original to the building, including the grand chandelier. The north and south are replicas, but these were maintained from the original building. They've been rewired, of course. And the red glass in the exit signs is original to 1900. The windlass. You guys don't see this. You have to crawl all the way up and over. But this is original to 1900. It dates to the show's vaudeville days. It's nothing fancy, and the technology belongs to Archimedes. It's really nothing fancy. But for it to still exist as a piece of theatrical equipment is remarkable. It was there for scenery repair. If you're doing 5 shows a day and a dancer kicks her heel through the scenery, it has to be fixed, and you're not going to take it down and take it out of the building to fix it. They would literally put a frame on it. The windlass would lift it into the flies. They would fix it, and when it was dry, they would drop it back into the next show. It's just kind of too big to come down, so it's still there. But the major change that happens at this time, we had been 2,400 seats, and it's coming down to 1,386. That's way less revenue. Why do you drop your seat count that much? There are a number of reasons. Number one, by 1923, films are creeping in and live theater tickets are not selling at the same rate. Kansas City had a glut of theater seats that needed to be filled. The Century had always been considered cramped, and they wanted to draw luxury patrons to legitimate theater, so they needed it to be a luxury experience and not the masses. They wanted to shed the burlesque image and get women in there. If it was going to be a new experience, they needed women to fill those houses also. And in 1903, the Iroquois Theater fire in Chicago killed 600 people and created fire codes for gathering spaces. So they didn't exist when the theater was originally built, but fun fact, all exterior doors in America open out because of the Iroquois Theater fire. Just 9 days before opening, they named their new stock company the National Stock Company. And on September 22nd, 1923, the Shubert, Missouri opened with the National Stock Company's production of Why Men Leave Home. And guess what? Guess what? It's not going very well. The show received good reviews, and the new interior was highly regarded, but 12th Street was a rough and tumble spot. So in a letter from October 8th, 1923, just 16 days after they opened, Ray Whitaker told Lee Shubert, "The Missouri, which was formerly the Century, the last 5 years was a second-rate burlesque house. The Edwards Hotel adjoining was closed by the federal authorities for being a booze joint. 1 block below the toughest restaurant in town was another booze joint. The gang there about 6 weeks ago took the guns and clubs away from 2 policemen and threw them out of the place. Therefore, you can see the neighborhood is not really the place for a family stock house. But we've been here before, and maybe Shakespeare and Eugene O'Neill need a little balance." But by December, the Shuberts were considering breaking their lease. They'd put all the money in, but it just absolutely wasn't working. And in one last shot, they booked an up-and-coming group of brothers. Julius, Leonard, Arthur, and Herbert Marx, later known as Groucho, Harpo, Chico, and Zeppo, the Marx brothers, played their smash hit Alsatias. This was pre-Broadway. It was the first show in Kansas City history to run for 3 weeks, and even played a Christmas Day matinee to reach the scores of people who were clamoring to see the show. It wasn't without drama, as they had the same issue that plagued the theater since the doors opened, the size of the stage. The Star reported, "The Missouri has possibly the smallest stage of any theater in Kansas City, and putting a large production like Alsatias on it was nothing short of torture for the stage crew. Once, when Julius Marx and Lotta Miles were in front of the curtain, the first row spectators heard a frantic 'Stall, stall!' whispered to the actors from the wings as a particularly heavy 20-foot set piece defied being moved into a 15-foot space." But it was enough to revive the Shuberts' interest in keeping going. And in 1924, you know him as Bogey, Hollywood and cultural icon Humphrey Bogart. In 1924, he was on his first national tour, playing the Missouri in a production called Meet the Wife. His name was at the bottom of the bill, but it was his first national tour. This is a production photo from them. He looks like a baby. Shirley Booth, you know her best as Hazel from television, but she was one of the nation's most celebrated stage actresses, and she spent the 1927-28 repertory season on stage at the Missouri, and she starred in 8 different shows. 2 steps quick. We know that the Shuberts were starting to intermittently sublet. By the late 20s, they were decreasing a lot of their holdings around the US. And we have this Shakespeare playbill from January of 1929. But early in that year, the electric burlesque sign that had been there in the Century days came out of storage, and it was sublet to a burlesque company, and another legend was born. If you've seen the musical Gypsy, you know this story already. A relatively unknown troupe of vaudevillians called Rose Louise and her Hollywood Blondes pulled up front, prepared to do a 4-week run at the theater. When they arrived and realized they were to play a burlesque house, Rose Louise's mother, Mama Rose, blatantly refused. The manager of the theater reminded her that she was under contract, and their show was to be the legitimate act that kept the police out. After much persuasion, they agreed to stay. And just a couple days into their run, the producer saw the 15-year-old Rose Louise, which is about how old she is in this photo in the middle, and decided they liked her height and her legs. She was cast in a skit called The Pineapple Growers, and her 4-week run was the first burlesque audiences saw of the girl who came as Rose Louise Hobick and left as Gypsy Rose Lee. But it's 1929 and the Great Depression has arrived. Nobody has money for food, much less theater tickets, and the shows and the subletters dried up. The Shuberts tried to hang in, but by October of 1931, they gave the owners notice that they were vacating their lease. They paid out $93,000 to cover the next 35 months of rent, which is about $2 million today. The signs came down, the name was sanded off the front of the building, and it had no name. for the remainder of the Depression. In 1938, a California woman holding a bond on the property at the corner of 12th and Central that amounted to owning 1/11th tried to get all the other stakeholders to go in with her to sell the property, and her lawyer said that the land had greater value with the theater off than with it on. But they did not know that the theater had already been auctioned for back taxes, and they were not allowed to sell it. So it survived, but of Kansas City's great live entertainment venues, the Sam S. Schubert, the Garden, which was also the Hippodrome at one time, and the Globe were all torn down. The Standard Century, Missouri, made it and would rise again as the Folly Burlesque. With the entrance of soldiers into World War II, and quickly thousands of recruits rooted through Kansas City's Union Station on their way to war, there was a new incarnation of the art form with an old name, and the theater reopened in 1941 as the Folly Burlesque. The popularity of the Ziegfeld Follies and its national tours, and audiences abandoning vaudeville and traditional burlesque in favor of movies, meant you had to take off a little bit more to compete. Burlesque shows by then had become what we now colloquially know as burlesque. And it was strip-teased by the 1940s, along with some comics and blue humor. There were 5 shows a day, and the Folly was quickly a hot spot in what was known as the Wheel, which was the circuit of theaters that would trade performers around to keep things fresh. The lead showgirl was called the Talking Woman because she was the one who was allowed to speak. The most famous burlesque queens had class, and they commanded respect for their talents. They mastered the art of suggestion rather than employing blatant nudity. Think Gypsy Rose Lee, who was always more teased than strip. Every girl had a gimmick, whether it was being the world's tallest exotic or an elaborate costume, anything from a Russian Cossack to Marie Antoinette. But it's the 40s and 50s, and burlesque was regulated by strict decency laws. While Kansas City was a wide open town for all kinds of vice up through Prohibition, it was now one of the strictest cities on the wheel. There was a sign on the bulletin board backstage that said, "Women must wear net pants and brassieres," which I found this in the article, in the box yesterday. The sign, photo of the actual sign. But the bulletin board also said, "No bumps or grinds directly to the audience. No hanging on curtains. Do not touch body. No extreme flash. Wear panels. No suggestive lyrics in any vocal numbers. This is local law, and they are very strict." Every girl had a gimmick, but they all knew when to stop. There was a red light in the footlights that would tell them if there was a cop in the house and they were going to get busted. But the Folly was raided, and the dancers were arrested dozens of times over the years. Pinky Lee. Comics were as much a part of the burlesque show as the girls. The show was not just strip numbers. It was a succession of comic, stripper, ballet, comic, strip. Pinky Lee was known later for his television work, but he did begin his career in burlesque, and he played the Folly countless times. All of the great names in burlesque took a turn on the Folly stage. Tempest Storm, who performed all the way up to 2010, is perhaps one of the best-known burlesque queens. She attended the reopening in 1981. She's hugging Walter Cronkite in the lower left-hand corner. And she did come for the 90th birthday party in 1990. Rose LaRose was another of the great names to cross the stage. She, in her career, commanded $2,500 a week in the 40s and 50s. It's a lot of money. And she is one of the rare ones who later in life went on to, she became an owner. She owned 2 burlesque houses in Minnesota later in her career. Ann Corio, another icon of burlesque, took a spin on the Folly stage. In 1959, the Folly was named the best burlesque theater in the nation. But as time wore on and fashions changed, women had to take off a little more to compete with the fashions on the street and the beach. And yeah. Lily St. Cyr, I swear this never went out because everything's misspelled on it. I think it survived because nothing ever went out. Lily St. Cyr's name is, she was known to perform on stage in a glass bathtub. But she was up there with Gypsy Rose Lee and Rose LaRose in her popularity. Rosita Royce is here with her Dance of the Doves, but she regularly performed with parrots. Georgia Southern's name, which is misspelled on the poster, that is how you spell it in the upper right, and Jack Diamond were also regulars at the Folly. But by the 1960s, Suburban Flight was leaving downtown abandoned. The hotel was offering rooms for $250 a night, and it was mostly inhabited by transients. In 1965, the Missouri Hotel and the Arcadia Hotel that was just to the west at 12th and Broadway both met their fate with the wrecking ball. And where the Missouri Hotel was became a surface parking lot. That left the dressing room wing without some of its structural support, and the plumbing became even more problematic. And things were taking a fairly drawn-out turn for the worst. By the end of the decade, August of '69, there was no longer anything interesting about a body stocking stripper. Strip tease had become all strip and not a lot of tease. On December 28th, 1969, the Kansas City Star reported that the Folly Burlesque would no longer be using the services of exotic dancers, and they would be replaced by showings of adult art films. The comment by the manager, in addition to noting the insane amount of trash he was cleaning out of the building, was, this is in the left column, "We have found it doesn't pay to have burlesque regularly. It's much better to have it once in a while. These girls they have around here all the time are vulgar, they're cheap. They've cheapened the name of burlesque. We're still trying to bring in some big names for burlesque about once a month or so." And the morning of December 29th, 1969, the Star reported that someone shoved a stick of dynamite down the west wall drain pipe. It did not structurally damage the building. It did blow out the windows in 18 businesses around. It knocked the outer layer of bricks out, but that wall's about 3 foot thick. It didn't actually go all the way through. On the inside, the plaster on the west wall was soft because the steam pipes had been leaking, and so it crumbled all the plaster on the west wall. Suddenly, the management was trying to walk back their comments about the girls who were dancing there and said, "We didn't really say that." And I said, "Reporter's notes are pretty clear, you did." They did not ever solve what the source of the dynamite was. They don't know if it was someone who didn't want an X-rated movie theater downtown, someone who was mad that they weren't going to use the girls anymore, or if it was just random downtown vandalism. They proceeded with the shift and reopened in January of 1970 with X-rated films. The poster on the right is one of the tamest of those posters. That's why it's here. This theater's policy was most definitely adult entertainment. So they reopened in January of 1970, and in January of 1974, after a last forgettable X-rated film, The Folly was closed, and Deja Vu, it was sold to become a parking lot for the convention center. Again, the sign on the door read, "Closed permanently." We don't even spell permanently well. "Thanks for your patronage." But here came Joan Kent Dillon. Joan is a local historic preservation activist, and she was enthusiastic about saving the Folly from the wrecking ball, alongside numerous volunteers, possibly some of you in this room, including William Doremus III. She led the charge to save the building and save Kansas City's last remaining turn-of-the-century theater. Remember that they'd already lost 3 other theaters somewhat recently. By June of 1974, the Folly was accepted onto the National Register of Historic Places. But getting a community excited to save this, that had been known for trench coats and sticky floors, most residents would never have set foot in here, so getting people excited was going to be a real challenge. There was a ton of work to be done on the building. It had not been maintained for a very long time. And along with that was fundraising. Local legend has it that the large Folly sign was auctioned as part of the KCPT auction. If anyone knows about that, please let me know. It was going to take an extraordinary effort to clean the exterior of the building and make it presentable as part of the 12th Street streetscape. As you can see in the top of this slide, there isn't a lot left of the windows, including the signature Palladian window. And remember Joe Donigan's smoke if you like policy? Look at the ceiling. The interior of the theater would take even more work to restore. The ceiling had extensive damage from years of neglect, including watermarks from roof leaks and the buildup of tar and nicotine from smoking patrons. The theater's seats were in severe states of disrepair and not salvageable. And from years of neglect and tuck pointing, plus the dynamite blast, the plaster on the west wall had crumbled completely. The staircase on house left was ripped away from the wall and unsafe to use. And you can see, if you look to the right in the center of the photo, you can see the south chandelier laying in the balcony. The balcony had been closed for years. Theater's previous management took a paint as high as you can reach method of maintenance. The Palladian window had been broken out for several years before the theater closed. And when you have broken windows in an urban area, you get pigeons. When you get pigeons, you get 9.5 tons of pigeon droppings that had to be cleaned out of the attic. The Folly still honors these longtime residents. If you're a volunteer, the highest order, the honor at the end of the year, you get the Order of the Pigeon. If you are, but they continue to honor these residents. These intrepid preservationists made saving the Folly a centerpiece of the community, and it was a national story on the regular. Countless volunteers spent many hours and weekends helping to clean out Kansas City's oldest theater and prepare the Grand Lady for her best days yet. In 1976, a fundraiser called Strip the Folly auctioned many of the items from the theater's colorful past. Legendary fan dancer Sally Rand, also a Missouri girl, who was most famous for her appearance at the 1933 World's Fair, and those fans that weighed 8 pounds apiece. She swirled them and you never saw her body, 8 pounds apiece, that's some arms. But she gave her very last performance of her life at the Folly at that auction, and she died in 1978. A local chemical company, newly active in historic preservation, was working on chemicals that were designed to clean the grime off bricks without having to sandblast it, which would damage them. And they provided all the chemicals to clean the exterior of the Folly, but it had to be applied with a toothbrush, left to sit, and then rinsed away. So if you can imagine how long it took to clean the facade with a toothbrush, but it worked. And the Folly is frequently called the Grand Lady of 12th Street, so we say that year she got her chemical peel. The Standard, now Folly, holds the distinction as the first burlesque house to be placed on the National Register of Historic Places. And the only change to the south facade since 1900 is that it now says Folly Theater. The great majority of the chairs were not salvageable and had to be removed. In fact, there was so much trash in the building that a 90-foot dumpster was placed on Central, and they filled it every day for a year. Work continued over the course of 7 more years at a cost of $7 million to restore the interior of the building, what today would be $34 million to redo the interior. Plasterers were brought out of retirement to teach younger craftsmen the old techniques of molding and applying decorative plaster, and they took molds from the east wall to recreate the west wall. And the delicate plaster was repaired and restored to look in its 1923 condition. 2 of the 5 ceiling chandeliers were beyond repair. Replicas were reproduced. Like I said, the north and south are replicas. The east to west are original. The proscenium arch was cleaned, repaired, and restored. And the theater was restored to provide entertainment in all forms, including performing arts, parties, business meetings. And the Folly was ready for reopening in 1981. The restored auditorium sat 1,078, including 24 luxurious box seats. And for 19 years, the auditorium was decorated in classic greens, whites, beiges, and tans. This is what it looked like when I arrived. A new lobby space was designed because the old ceilings in the 1900 lobby were very low. The architectural firm PBNA designed the new lobby for a much more welcoming atmosphere. So from 1981 to 2000, this is what the lobbies looked like. If you look, the right-hand corner in the right photo in the upper right-hand corner, we have a pigeon. There were 2 wooden cutout pigeons that lived there to honor the prior residents. There was one that was resting and one that was in flight. I don't know where they are, but they were special. We kept them at the renovation. I don't know where they are now. But so there was a false facade. This is where the box office was, and the offices were on site behind this wall in what is currently a lobby. And the Folly, completely restored, opened November 11th, 1981, with a production of Room Service starring Eddie and Edward Albert. Oh God, hang on. There we go. The greatest names in live entertainment returned to the Folly stage. We have Dizzy Gillespie, Cloris Leachman, Rosemary Clooney, Alvin Ailey, and so many more. Over the next 19 years, the theater's own jazz and children's series, along with the William Jewell Harriman Arts Program, Friends of Chamber Music, and Heartland Men's Chorus became tenant clients, presenting arts in the incredible acoustics of what became known as Kansas City's Carnegie Hall. I joined the Folly in 1998 And at that point, we were just formulating plans to do a capital campaign for the centennial that was going to do a full renovation. Everything we had was woefully out of date. The carpets were worn through, the seats needed to be replaced. The technology, we couldn't get anybody that wanted to come because we were still running the light board off a floppy disk, and the sound was still all analog when all of that is digital now. It really needed some love. And so the lobby was too small to be useful for galas, but we closed in May of 2000 to put in a new lobby, moved the offices off-site, and turned that whole annex into a lobby for a $2.1 million renovation in time for the September 100th birthday party. This was by BNIM Architects. And the Evergreen Studios, who specialize in paint treatments for historic theaters and other historic structures, were brought in to give the interior a fresh look that showed how special all of this delicate ornamentation is. For a year before the shutdown, some of you may not remember this, we painted a small section of House Right of what it was going to look like. And that brought out a lot of feelings. There were a lot of people who had opinions, some who thought the theater needed to stay monochromatic, some who said if you're going to go 1923, those colors need to be way bolder. So it was a large debate, but ultimately we followed the Evergreen Studios' suggestion of what would be the best palette to honor the past and also hit modern sensibilities. And I think it turned out really well. The one thing that is, so we went with red seats and carpets because we knew that red had been such an integral part. We knew from the paint test that that was a huge part of the 1923 interior, and the original articles also said the carmine red was part of the 1900, so it was red. But what to do about this proscenium? We're not going to paint on a 100-year-old fresco. So if you look, the oval that is above the fresco, that was just an empty oval before this. So we added FT for Folly Theater inside that oval. And on September 23rd, 2000, 100 years to the day since she opened with the Jolly Grass Widows, the Folly reopened in this incarnation with a gala performance by Gregory Hines. That was an incredible night. She looked so beautiful. By the way, the gouge in the piano lid is from Gregory Hines dancing on it, if you see that during the show. And so with the restoration, Folly Jazz and Folly Children's continued to thrive. There was a lot more programming. It was everyone from Yo-Yo Ma to Bob Woodward, Sam and Cokie Roberts, Tim Russert, Audra McDonald, comedians like Jay Moore, folk art cons like John Prine. It has always hosted the best entertainment. In July of 2010, President Barack Obama appeared at the Folly in support of Missouri Secretary of State Robin Carnahan. In 2012, a new razor sign was introduced. It had been since the 70s that the theater had a razor sign. I think she looks beautiful. It looks great. And beginning in 2017, a strategic plan and capital campaign was put into place to refurbish the theater one more time. Helix Architecture and Design were responsible for phase one and redesigned the lobby and the concession area that you'll see when we walk over, as well as converting the shareholders' room into what had been a conference room into what is now the Joan Kent Dillon Lounge. This is a sometimes performance space, it's a meeting space. PGAV architects were responsible for phase two that we will see. The auditorium has been named in honor of Steve Metzler, a longtime champion of the Folly and one of the loveliest souls you will ever meet. For decades since the original reopening in 1981, he was a great friend to the Folly. And the lobby has been renamed the Joan Hubbard Lobby in honor of the Folly's volunteer coordinator for several decades. Joni was not only a quiet and incredibly generous donor to the Folly, but she was also very dear to so many volunteers and to me. I miss her very much. The Folly is a nonprofit and all of its ushers are volunteers, and she scheduled and trained all of them for decades. I know that not everyone will probably take the walk with us over, but just in case you don't, you have to see this incredible stained glass that is now behind the bar in the upstairs lobby. That's a reflection of the facade of the building. I think it's so beautiful. In our last update that was completed in 2022, the theater has a jazz and Americana series, as well as her 10 clients we mentioned before, available for rent for the world's best performances, but also corporate events, meetings, weddings, everything. And in August of 2024, the one and only Ms. Dolly Parton spent a day at the Folly for the statewide launch of her Imagination Library. The razor sign out front was converted for the day to say Dolly rather than Folly. And on Tuesday, this grand lady of 12th Street turns 125, standing just as she did in 1900 with a lot of story to tell, not only as a place where the best memories are made, but as a symbol for the country to downtown revitalization. And here's to her next 125 years. We'll take a few minutes for questions here. We will take a walk over to the theater, of course, but if you have any questions, there are mics. We can take 10 minutes or so and answer anything people have.
Yeah, if you would, please use the
come on up
use
to the mic if
mic
you
so we
can.
can hear you.
So that the live stream can hear you. Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Can the live stream hear? Everybody good?
Hello.
Great.
My name is Phyllis Woodward of the, my husband Craig Woodward is sitting there, and he is Odie Woodward's great-grandson.
Amazing!
The Woodwards are still around.
I
They're
love
not in
that.
show business.
Not in show business
We have
anymore.
a lot of Odie stuff,
I
the
love
silver
that.
and. But I want to tell you a cute little story about Odie Woodward.
Yeah.
It's about Harry Truman. When Harry Truman was a little boy,
Yeah.
he was a ticket taker at the Willis Wood Theater
Ah.
for Odie Woodward. And we have a ton of stories, but
Sure.
that's the only one I'm going to bore you with today.
I love that. Excellent. Anybody have questions? Come on up.
Kid, I have a question. Can you give us a little information about that Donigan ghost that you
Yes.
referenced? Or are you saving that for the tour afterwards?
Either one. If are we all here for a ghost story? Okay. Joe, it took a while to figure out what. All right, when I joined the Folly, I started doing all this research. Probably 2 years in, I found articles there was an interview with several strippers who were talking about how haunted the theater was. And I was like, well, that's very fun. Okay. And I went flying back into the stagehand's office, and I was like, Doc, you have to see this. Like, did you know that it's haunted? Did you? And he's like, well, yeah. And I was like, no, but really, like, it says right here, like, this is what they're seeing. And he's like, yeah, have you not had a patron call you yet? And I said, well, no. And he's like, oh, just wait. Somebody's going to call you. And sure enough, we had several over the course of my 6 years there. We had patrons who would call and say, I love that docent that you had in the lobby who told me all about the theater. Can you, I want to thank him. Who is that? And I was like, well, what event did you come to? Let me find, we don't have a docent, but let me look at the volunteer sheet. Did you see, and they were like, no, not the red coats, not those maroon coats. No, he's in the lobby and he tells people all about the theater. And I was like, we don't have someone telling people about the theater. He said, no, he told me all about the hotel next door and that there was a cabaret in the basement. He told me all about it. And I was like, that's amazing. I assume that was another patron because we don't have a docent in the lobby. And then a couple years after that, our development director's daughter was in the lower dressing room. Her mom was working the show, so there was nobody using downstairs. She was doing her homework. And she came up and she's like, oh, that man in the basement told me all about the cabaret. And I was like, who is in the basement? You should have been down there. She's 10 years old. And I was like, who's down there? I went flying. I went all the way down the stairs thinking, and she's like, no, he was in costume. And I was like, honey, we have a chamber music thing tonight. Everyone's in formal wear. No one's in costume tonight. She's like, no, he told me all about it. And I said, well, where did he go? I literally checked the orchestra pit. I'm flying through. I think we have a stranger in the building. And she's like, I don't know. When my mom called, he just kind of disappeared, I guess. But she was 10 years old, and she knew everything about the Edwards Cabaret. She knew all about all of this. I had patrons that would call and say that they had seen him. They're like, this is super weird, and I've never said this to anybody, but I saw a ghost. So over time, through many of these stories, and based on outfit descriptions, they were always the same. we sort of came to the conclusion, and we had a custodian who had a different relationship with the astral plane than I do, who assured me that it was actually Joe Donigan that is still around. So, and Rick, where's Rick? Where are you? Rick, didn't you have the cops call you and say that somebody was in your lobby?
It was not me, actually. It
Oh.
was Gail.
Oh, it was Gail.
That's what I was told.
Gail, you're here too. Did you have somebody call and say someone was in the lobby?
Well,
When the-
actually, we had somebody drive by who was a police officer.
Oh.
And they called and said, there's somebody in your lobby who's wearing a white top hat and
Yeah.
heels.
Yeah,
And so that was Joe Donigan.
Yeah.
Obviously. And this person said, we're not crazy. I'm a police officer, I promise.
yeah,
So pretty amazing.
yeah. The story kind of hasn't changed. He died in 1930, and the story hasn't changed even through newspaper accounts. Yes?
The original 1900 building had the third balcony.
The second,
and
yeah.
It also had a separate entrance for that balcony. And I've seen drawings of that. And
Sure.
I'm assuming that was to segregate a certain type of audience. In the 1923 drawings, the Schubert, that you've seen in the Schubert archives,
Yeah.
was there any provision to maintain that segregation?
No, not that I know of. Let's go back. Actually, going forward may be quicker. Oh, nope, that didn't work at all. Caleb, how do I get back? But no, I did not see any provision for separate doors. I've heard that as well. I've never found where in the drawings it is. If you know, I would love to see.
In the 23 drawings?
No, in the 1900.
23 drawings. I'm glad you
Yeah.
found them.
Yeah, they live in New York at the Schubert Archive.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yes. What is that? What is this? Oh, I forgot to talk about it. This is the remaining piece of the south chandelier that you saw laying in the balcony. Do take a look if you want. You can see the horsehair that binds the plaster. It's very cool. So it was replicated, but you can see on the back where we have the horsehair that held it all together. It's very fun. Yes?
Did you say there was only one restored chandelier?
2.
Okay, I
But-
misunderstood because I think I would volunteer.
Yeah.
I told you there was only one, so
Yeah, it's the north and south chandeliers that were replicated.
I'm glad.
Yeah, let's go back to 23. Come on. We have this. That doesn't really give us exterior, though. That's not exterior. Here we go. We have a new box office here. We have ideas of a very grand manager's apartment or manager's office in there. I don't see anything separate, but it doesn't give us the whole building either. Yeah. Anybody?
What's one of your favorite memories from working
Oh.
on the restoration?
As part of the restoration, or
Just in general?
in general?
Whether it was part of the restoration or any kind of show or?
I think my favorite of all, thank you for asking, Yo-Yo Ma was with us a number of times, and was the year that we were doing a morning children's performance, and the Kansas School of the Blind was coming. And they choose as their mascot something that you can hear. So their teacher had gone to Barnes & Noble, and he had a new CD coming out, and they had gotten the full-size cardboard cutout of Yo-Yo Ma that they were going to get signed. And Carolyn Barnhart, Carolyn Barnhart, you're here. I don't remember Carolyn's last name now. She was the production manager. Asked me to meet her. She said, I'm gonna need some help. Can you come over? We're gonna surprise the Kansas School of the Blind. And so they thought that they were getting a signature from Yo-Yo Ma, and instead we took 10 blind kindergartners backstage to meet Yo-Yo Ma, and nothing will melt your heart more than him putting his hand over a 5-year-old's and bowing his Stradivarius cello. As it was incredible. That's my favorite of all time while I was there.
Kate, I think that's a good place to
Great.
end it. I want to thank everyone for coming out. A reminder that a group is going to be traveling, walking over to the Folly. If you want a tour, you're welcome to join that group. And we also have a display of historical artifacts in the Missouri Valley Room right across the hall. You're welcome to stop by and take a look at those. And let's thank Kate Egan for her presentation.
Thank you all for coming. If you're coming over to the Folly, we'll go out of the library door to the right and go up 2 blocks to Central, make a left and go down 2 blocks to the theater. Yeah.
Is